Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our webinar is entitled Functional Nutrition Testing in Obesity. Our presenter is clinician Melanie Dorion. My name is Dr. Lenore Powell, and I am a medical education specialist in Genova's Atlanta branch, and I'm going to serve today as your moderator. We would like to welcome clinician Melanie Dorion. She is an integrative and functional nurse practitioner, founder and medical director at Sauna V Health. She focuses on managing and reversing chronic illnesses, disease prevention, health, and performance optimization. Her approach is grounded in nursing, functional, and naturopathic medicine philosophies. She studied naturopathic medicine at Bastyr University in Washington before doing her nurse practitioner degree at Seattle University. She has received advanced training in obesity management, nutrition, exercise science, herbal medicine, and genetics, allowing for a unique approach to health concerns. Melanie's work centers on chronic complex illnesses, disease prevention, environmentally acquired illnesses, and performance optimization. She is a chronic disease survivor herself, having reversed chronic fatigue, and is now dedicated to helping others. Melanie thrives to support patients wanting to feel their best, whatever their role, from being a parent, an athlete, business owner, or even an executive. She is a member of the Institute for Functional Medicine, American Academy of Environmental Medicine, Obesity Medicine Association, and the Virginia Council of Nurse Practitioners. Melanie is also passionate about educating patients and healthcare providers and teachers through her online educational platform, Pentad Integrative Health, and enjoys public speaking. She has made appearances on To Your Health Radio and I Love Seville in Charlottesville. Her speaking engagements include Genova Diagnostics, A4M, BioHealth Congress, FIM, and is a regular speaker at Mary Baldwin University, in addition to leading health workshops and functional forum meetings in Virginia. In addition, if you need to access the presentation after the webinar has completed, you'll be able to do so on our website within a few days. You can go to these resources using our website, www.gdx.net, and you can look at previous webinar recordings, brief video modules, and other materials by clicking on the Clinicians tab on the homepage. So now I am going to turn over the role of presenter to clinician Melanie Dorion.
Hey, am I on, Lenore?
Awesome. Yes, you are on,
Awesome.
and we see your slide.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on your lunch break, or hopefully it's your lunch break, or taking this time. So we're going to go over really nutritional deficiencies and functional testing in the patients with obesity. I've been doing weight management, medical weight management in my practice for over 6 years, and really noticed early on in my practice, after I integrated functional testing, that my patients who were overweight and obese definitely had significant amounts of nutritional deficiencies. So I think it is a very important topic and often overlooked in our patients. So here, okay, so we're going to look at the factors that are involved in nutrient imbalances in patients. We're going to look at oxidative stress in the obese and overweight individuals, and we're going to look at diagnostic testing, functional testing, and look at what we can do for our patients who are overweight and obese and how we can have a comprehensive approach. So this is the outline for today. The contributing factors that we're going to focus on are the medications, toxins, and then gut imbalances. And I'm going to talk a little bit about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or just fatty liver, just because it's so common in the obese population, and it is linked actually to gut imbalances and nutritional deficiencies. And then we're going to go over oxidative stress, and we're going to really focus on phase 2 detox, methylation, and then review testing, management, and go over 2 cases. So the contributing factors are multiple, but today we are focusing on meds, toxins, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and gut imbalances. But in general, just to have a quick snapshot, this is a review that I put together after looking at many, many studies and many of my patient profiles, I found these to be extremely common in my patients with obesity. We're looking at almost 50, possibly almost up to 50% of patients who are overweight or obese with vitamin C deficiencies. I think most of us are also seeing that in our practice, that vitamin D. I think we have a world epidemic of vitamin D deficiency, but in the obese population, it's almost guaranteed that your overweight or obese patient is going to have a vitamin D deficiency. And then B12, folate, and iron are also extremely common. Now let's review some of the medications that contribute to nutrient imbalances and the nutrients that are at risk. And again, when you think about the patients who are overweight, obese, and who have diabetes, hypertension, these are extremely common medications. We're looking at the beta blockers, for example. The nutrients at risk are CoQ10 and melatonin. So remember also how many patients who are overweight or obese who also have sleep issues. Aside from sleep disorders such as sleep apnea, a lot of our patients just have sleep issues. And then loop diuretics, so Lasix, for example, we know how impactful Lasix can be on nutrients. So look at the long list of vitamins and minerals that are at risk on our patients who are on Lasix or loop diuretics. And then ACE inhibitors, so lisinopril, zinc, and sodium. So now metformin, that's a very common one. It's also used now more commonly also in patients with prediabetes, so not just in diabetics anymore, and for weight loss. And there's a trend that it's also becoming common or more common or recommended in some anti-aging realm because of some of its properties, anti-aging properties, but we gotta be super mindful about the nutrients that are at risk with this, with metformin. PPIs, I hope this comes to no surprise to our listeners, but omeprazole, for example, or some of the antacids that block our acid secretion, it almost guarantees B vitamin issues, especially B12, and also calcium and magnesium. So I see that a lot in my patients who are on PPIs. And then the statins, we know those definitely well in our realm that CoQ10 can become very low to dangerous levels for some people and involved in muscle damage and muscle fatigue. And now the weight loss medications. So when we think about Wellbutrin and topiramate that are in weight loss medications such as Contrave and Qsymia, we're looking at tyrosine, sodium, now glutathione. So I'll go into that a little bit more, but if your glutathione is suboptimal or completely low in your patients, they are at increased risk for issues with oxidative stress. This is a resource that I wanted to present where I will run my patients' medications into this. It's mytavin.com. It's a free website that reviews the nutrients that are at risk or maybe deficient with certain medications. So this one, for example, I just put in omeprazole, and these are the nutrients that have been shown to be deficient. So, and you can click also on the right here, you see the references. So there's the scientific literature behind that. So this is a good resource for you guys to have so that you can look up the medications and see what nutrients are at risk. Now let's talk about toxins for a little bit, because I do environmental medicine, so toxins is always something that I screen all my patients for. And when we think about our exposure in the US, we're exposed to, the US allows over 84,000 chemicals, and that's just for household products, cosmetics, food, and then food packaging. And a lot of these have not been tested for safety. So I don't want you guys to think that our agencies are really good at protecting us against toxins. They are not. And then just for personal care products, this is a statistics that, these are numbers that actually really worries me, and it's growing. But the number of chemicals we're looking at is over 10,000 chemical ingredients that are allowed to be in our personal care products. A lot of them, and this is allowed, are known or suspected carcinogens, are known endocrine disruptors, which is really bad when you think about it, because this is going on people's skin directly and going on their scalp and their hair and their creams, full on their bodies. So we are absorbing a lot of chemicals. And there's an interesting diagram that looked at the parallel between the chronic diseases, and we look at diabetes as a model for chronic disease, and then chemical production and the chemicals in our environment. And since the 60s and 70s, there's been an increased rise in chronic disease and diabetes, and that parallels almost perfectly the chemical production. So, you know, what came first, chicken or the egg? We're not sure, but certainly there's a parallel. So correlation at this point, we can't say for sure causation in some instances. In other instances, we can say for sure these chemicals are contributing to certain chronic diseases. But there's definitely a link. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's also very important to remember in the obese and overweight patients to don't forget to screen them for toxins. So I made this diagram just to remind us of what the endocrine disrupting chemicals are. So we're looking at the DDT, the phthalates, PCBs, and TBT, and mycotoxins, so mold toxins, and that's a big one. Thankfully, it's getting more attention nowadays, and it's being discussed a lot more in conferences and in our circles with functional and integrative medicine. It's a huge endocrine disruptor and will cause, for some patients, leptin resistance and insulin resistance and cause weight gain and contributes to being overweight and obese. And these of the endocrine disrupting chemicals, I pulled out the obesogens. So on the column here on the left are the endocrine disruptors that I just showed you in the previous slide. The ones that are specific obesogens, known to cause disruptions in metabolic pathway that results in weight gain. So that's what we're looking at in obesogens. So these are the toxins, the four main ones on your right here. So just keep that in mind in your patients who are struggling with weight loss or who feel really bad during weight loss. They're probably releasing obesogens that were stored in the fat cells. So another contributing factor to nutrient deficiencies, and there's definitely a link between these two, is fatty liver and the microbiome. And there's some fascinating and really good research on this in terms of the link between gut dysbiosis and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So we're looking at 15 to 30% fatty liver in the general population, but 50 to 90% in our obese patients. So this is something to not be missed, guys. Choline, so choline is an essential nutrient. We get it through our diet and we can also make it, but it's involved in the methylation pathway. And when you remember what methylation does, it's very closely linked to our detox pathways and is part of our detox pathways. So if choline is even suboptimal levels, it can really impact our detox pathways and our methylation. But even more interesting is that choline gets degraded by an abnormal or out of balance microbiome, and that can mimic a choline deficient diet, and that can directly be linked to fatty liver. And when you think also about choline's role in the body, it helps the efflux of VLDL from our liver cells. So when these VLDLs get stuck in our liver cells, it contributes to inflammation, thus also contributing to liver disease. This is a really interesting study that was published in 2017, and I really encourage you guys to go look this up. It's a really dense review, but there's so much information on here about the links between the microbiome and fatty liver. And when the microbiome is off, dysbiosis, leaky gut, SIBO, also SIBO, there's high rates of SIBO in patients with NASH. So all this, so you see at the top here, dysbiosis or leaky gut and microbiome imbalances will really trickle down on multiple different levels to affect the liver. If you look on the left of this diagram, the choline metabolism, this is where we start looking at the gut imbalances will affect choline and form some choline TMA metabolites that are sent to the liver because they're toxic, and then it turns to TMAO. And we know TMAO is also involved in cardiovascular disease. It also then can lead to choline deficiency. So that was a really interesting one for me and a good reminder to screen my patients for gut imbalances when they come to me for weight loss and weight management. The other really interesting one is here on the right, the LPS, the lipopolysaccharides, that a lot of these bacteria in our gut, so a lot of patients have LPSs when they have intestinal infections and SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. These will form complexes, inflammatory complexes, and secretion of IL-8, for example, and NF-kappa B gets secreted, and this is directly in the liver, contributing to liver inflammation. And then just a reminder that the choline deficiency will lead for some patients directly to fatty liver. And in the 2003 NHANES, so big review of population, they estimated about 10% of the population had inadequate intake of choline. So again, just a reminder that choline is involved in methylation, and I will review that again. So this paper, and I pulled this out because I thought that was really impactful, that gut dysbiosis, which we love treating, and we're good at it, is causative. They are saying this is directly causative for enhanced secretion of LPS, so the lipopolysaccharides, and it's mediated inflammation in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease development. So we're looking at a direct link between LPS, dysbiosis, and fatty liver. Now, oxidative stress. Our patients, we know this, who with obesity and overweight or obese individuals, they're more inflamed. But there's really good studies out there really looking deeper into this and how the chronic inflammation in obese patients will cause permanent increase in oxidative stress and link to chronic diseases. I just pulled out, and this is 2 of multiple studies that are out there looking at inflammation, oxidative stress as linked to especially visceral fat. So the skinny fat or skinny fat patients, the metabolic patients, so the visceral tissue. So if you look in the middle here, the adipose tissue, especially the visceral tissue, will contribute to reactive oxygen species. So even in our skinny fat patients, we got to keep that in mind. And then the impact on the mitochondria and our DNA is not negligible. So the RDA, or the recommended dietary allowance, actually most likely does not give us optimal levels of nutrients, and often not enough to prevent metabolic or DNA damage and oxidative stress. So about half of the population is estimated to be deficient in B12, folate, B6, the antioxidants, C and E, and that can directly be linked to DNA damage and oxidative lesions in our cells. And then the mitochondrial damage. Think about our overweight and obese individuals who are exhausted and have a hard time with exercise intolerance, often have a mitochondrial dysfunction. So also remember the medications they can be on. So the metformin or the statins, that's a really dangerous combo for our patients for mitochondrial issues. And then it's estimated about a quarter of the female menstruating population is getting about half of the RDA, which is the bare minimum you need to not have disease, for iron. So these are pretty grim data. So now we're going to jump into what we love in functional integrative medicine, is the detox pathways and all these awesome genetic pathways that help us manage inflammation and oxidation. So the pathways start up here on the right in the gray circle with KEAP1, and KEAP1 will activate NRF2 here, and NRF2 or NRF2 will then migrates to the DNA, and then it will activate our antioxidant response element, the ARE, which then turns on the phase 2. This is just a reminder of what we find in the phase 2, the conjugation phase, conjugation part of our phase 2. So we're looking at methylation, sulfation, the glutathione, and the glucuronidation. So we're really focusing today on methylation, and we're going to talk a little bit about sulfation. So phase 2, why we're talking about that today and why I'm bringing that out is that, well, one, now we know our patients have gut imbalances, obese and overweight patients and metabolic patients. They have a lot of nutrient deficiencies and they're exposed to toxins. So now phase 2 comes in really handy. We want their phase 2 detox to be optimal. Well, phase 2 needs a lot of nutrients. And you think about the proteins, the amino acids that are needed in there, it's pretty demanding on the body. So amino acids need to be pretty optimal. And then the vitamins. So we know there's a lot of vitamins involved in methylation. Just looking at the MTHFR, MTR, and MTRR genes, we're looking at high demands for B12 and folate. And then the minerals, magnesium, selenium, and zinc. And I know this comes as no surprise to many of you, but these are often very depleted or in suboptimal levels in our patients who are overweight and obese. Yay, the methylation pathway. So this is a page from the methylation pathway, the methylation test that Genova offers. And if you guys haven't done it yet, huge plug, I did mine this fall. And I have genetic methylation defects. So I'm MTHFR, I have 677, heterozygous, but I have many other methylation defect pathways. And I know directly contributed to my chronic illness. But if you look at this pathway and all the nutrients that are needed, and now I'm circling back to the choline discussion with liver disease. If you look right here in the middle under the green, the methionine, choline comes in, and it's really critical to be able to make the betaine or the TMG that we need to convert methionine to homocysteine and vice versa. And then MTHFR, which has gained a lot of attention probably in the last, I would say 10, 15 years, has really become more studied or better studied and better understood. That's in the folate pathway on the left-hand side. So just for MTHFR to function properly, you need obviously B12 because it's so closely linked to MTR and MTRR. And then you need B2, B3. And then just a reminder, I put that in there as a reminder that folic acid and why we do not like our patients to be on folic acid, which is a man-made form of folate. Folic acid above about 200 milligrams, I believe, will block almost this entire pathway starting at THS. So in our patients with methylation defects and MTHFR, folic acid is very detrimental. So I'm all about folate supplementation, food first, so lots of leafy greens. But if your patients are on folic acid, you need to get them off of that because it's most likely impacting greatly their methylation pathway. And remember that we have homocysteine down here in red that is linked to cardiovascular disease. So if they're on folic acid, they have methylation pathway issues, plus their own homocysteine is elevated, well, this increases the risk for cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, and for accumulation of toxins. So our overweight and obese patients, we need to do their methylation pathway to really optimize their health, plus the functional testing. And then just to get to glutathione, which is a little bit lower down in the transsulfuration pathway, look at all the nutrients that are needed just for glutathione, to make glutathione. One, it's a tripeptide, so you need amino acids. So glutamate, cysteine, glycine, but then you need magnesium, selenium, glycine, and B6 to make glutathione in the body. So when it comes to testing, so if the patient is not able to or doesn't have access to functional testing, which we all love functional testing, but we all know that sometimes our patients may not have access to that for a variety of reasons. There's actually pretty good testing through standard labs that can be extremely helpful. Don't ever forget to do a CBC on your patients and to look at the MCV. Don't overlook the MCV when it's out of normal range. This has been heavily studied, so if the MCV is borderline or out of range, either high or low, most likely you're looking at an impact from nutritional deficiencies or even suboptimal levels of nutrients. And then ferritin, which is our stored form of iron, and then B2. And the best way I found to assess B2 in standard lab testing is to look at the whole blood. And also keep in mind, especially for people doing nutritional IVs or IV nutrients, the G6PD is an enzyme that we have to run on all of our patients before we give vitamin C at high doses. If you find a G6PD deficiency in your patient and they have symptoms of B2 deficiency, the G6PD can mask a B2 deficiency. So just keep that in mind when you look at that, the big picture. And then having thyroid and adrenal issues, so any imbalances or dysfunction, it's going to decrease the activation of B2 into its active form, FAD. And then B6, plasma is the best way to do that because there's different ways of testing for B6. I recommend plasma. And then B9 or folate. Do both, please, serum and red blood cell, not just the serum folate, which often comes in a panel. You can do B12 and folate, so it's easy. But add on an extra folate test because you're going to start getting a little bit more information about the folate metabolism, or how the folate is being utilized in the body. And the red blood cell folate will reflect the total folate status in the body. And the folate in the plasma is not as reflective of the big picture. So the serum, it's almost all methylfolate. So that'll give you a really good idea what's going on with the folate in the body. And then for B12, I almost always run, especially if they're they have macrocytosis. Their MCV is big, so big fluffy red blood cells. I definitely look at both folate and B12, but then the best way to assess B12 is not just blood, it's also through a urinary test, and the best one is the first morning urine methylmalonic. And the NutrEval, which I am going to talk about, does have the methylmalonic marker plus many others for these nutrients. But at the very least, you can get good information with standard testing. And then to finish that standard testing conversation, homocysteine is really central to the methylation pathway, so you can get a lot of good information about that. And I'm going to go the next slide where I'm going to go to a little bit more detail about how to get as much information as you can from the homocysteine test from standard testing, or the methylation panel from Genova also gives you the homocysteine. But when it's elevated, we're looking at B6, B9, or B12 deficiency. So nutrient deficiencies, definitely. Methylation pathway that is not functioning optimally. Magnesium, serum, and red blood cells. If you're suspecting your patient is losing a lot of magnesium, they're taking some in, but they have all the symptoms of magnesium deficiency, just do a 24-hour urine. And if there's high levels in the urine, then they're losing their magnesium. Selenium, I much prefer plasma. I feel I get a better representation of the body's level of selenium. And then zinc, also plasma. And I put some ideal ranges there as well. So now functional testing, I'm not going to go over these, but I wanted to put this slide as a reminder that there's some really good resources. And if you look at the bottom right, there's the link. And this is in the book of laboratory evaluations for integrative and functional testing, has some really good resources about how to optimize these levels and these tests that are available to us. So now we're transitioning to functional testing, which is really exciting because I love the NutrEval. I also do the ION, but probably by far in my practice, I do the NutrEval. I really like the plasma levels because I feel I get a little bit more information about amino acids. So if you're not sure between the FMV, first morning void, or the plasma NutrEval, so I would recommend the plasma because especially if you have athletes or high performers, so people that you want to really fine tune things and really want to assess their protein and their amino acids, I feel like I get a little bit more information and more accurate results. So these are the two tests that I recommend for functional testing in my patients, and I do a lot of NutrEvals in my practice. So the NutrEval, one of my favorite pages is the urine metabolic analysis markers, because if you look at the top left, it has the gut markers, so the malabsorption and dysbiosis markers, which is incredibly informative, especially in our patients who are being very resistant to make dietary or lifestyle changes, or don't believe that they should go on an elimination diet because they don't have any gut symptoms. This will give them hard data as to why we need to work on their gut. So sometimes we need a little bit more support or a little bit more data to help our patients make decisions. So this is a really, really good page, one of my favorite pages of the entire NutrEval. So you look at malabsorption markers at the top. So this is, do they need some digestive enzymes or some herbal bitters? Do they need to do the hydrochloric acid challenge? And then also the yeast markers. I do a lot of mold illness, and I'm finding there's definitely a pattern with my patients with exposure to mold or with mold illness, typically have generally just more issues with yeast and fungal overgrowth, and I see those markers elevated often. And then at the bottom right, we see the toxin and detox markers. That's also something I look at in all of my patients, but especially in my patients who are here to see me for weight loss, because if they're hugely toxic, I'm going to start a detox protocol and a gut protocol before I do anything for weight loss. Because just keep in mind, if we release all those toxins through weight loss, rapid or not, they're going to feel poorly. They're going to feel like they're hurting, and they're not going to like you. So we want our patients to like us at least a little bit, and we're already asking them so many hard things. So just keep in mind when you look at the NutriVal, don't miss the gut markers, don't miss the yeast markers, and really take a look at those toxins, because those are really good markers that can indicate the general load on the body, or the burden, body burden of toxins. And I caution you to start, in terms of starting a weight loss program, if they're pretty toxic. So I would really encourage you to start a gut healing program and a detox program a month before you start addressing more directly the weight. Typically, if you get things in balance, patients will start losing weight more naturally. And then this is my next favorite page of the NutriVal. We're looking at the oxidative stress markers. So here at the top, we have the glutathione. So that's the whole blood level of glutathione. Lipid peroxide. This clinical pearl, guys, anyone doing or getting into environmental medicine and mold illness, if this is in the yellow or the red, and they have or suspected mold exposure, they're getting some cell damage because of these toxins. And a lot of my mold patients are in the red, have not just suboptimal, but frankly elevated lipid peroxides. And lipid peroxides represents damage to the fatty layer of our cell membranes. And mycotoxins, mold toxins, get stored in our fat cells. So the cell membranes often are more oxidized and more damaged. So just clinical pearl, look at the lipid peroxides. If you suspect toxins and mycotoxins or mold illness, I have used that as a marker to confirm or diagnose patients actually with mold illness when it's just not clear otherwise. And then I really like looking at DNA damage. So the 8-OHDG looks at damage to our guanosine base in our DNA. So if that's elevated, these patients are really having a hard time fixing their DNA. So the methylation panel, I was referring to that earlier when I was going over the methylation. This is a panel that Genova now has, and in my opinion, it is the best functional testing for methylation in the industry. And you're going to get so much information. If your patients haven't done their genetic testing for methylation, you can add the genes. If they've already done it, a lot of our patients come to us pretty savvy about some of these things, and they've already done their genetic testing through multiple different platforms that exist. And then you don't have to add the genes on there, but you just do the panel to see what their functional markers are. And remember that I was talking about the choline and the betaine earlier. Well, here we are, and the homocysteine. So we're going to get all that information to see how functionally their methylation is working or not. So when you look at all these markers that Genova's put into this methylation panel, you're going to get a really good idea of what's going on and where things are blocked or where things are not working optimally. So this is super informative. And this is just, I'm going to focus just on how to use homocysteine. I mentioned that earlier because we can do homocysteine tests through standard testing. You don't have to do a full methylation panel. And if our patients don't have access or can't do a full methylation panel, here are a couple ways that the homocysteine can really be informative. So because you can have elevated homocysteine, so there's a couple different scenarios that we're looking at, so between homocysteine and methionine. So HCY is homocysteine. So when the methionine, so methionine is up the top, so that's the one that gets converted between methionine and homocysteine. So methionine is up here in green. So when methionine is high and the homocysteine is low, effectively think about this pathway here on the right, so I put a red X, is blocked or sluggish or impacted in some way negatively. So you're not converting the methionine into SAM or SAMe. So this pathway here on the right is not working well. So that's where you need to put your focus, and you need to start figuring out why this side of the pathway is not functioning optimally. And then the next scenario is when the methionine, again, the top here in the green, the methionine marker is normal, and then the homocysteine is high. So HCY, just remember HCY is homocysteine. So when homocysteine is high, but your methionine is normal, if everything is happening well in the middle and at the bottom, homocysteine should be converted and go into the transsulfuration and go into glutathione without any issues. So if homocysteine is backed up or is high with a normal methionine, it often indicates a B6 deficiency. So you look at what comes below homocysteine. So why is homocysteine blocked? Effectively, it's being blocked from being converted. So often we start looking at issues with CBS. So that's why there's a number 2 here, the Ren number. It just goes with the number 2 methionine scenario. So we start looking, it could be iron too, because CBS needs B6 and iron as cofactors, but often I see that with issues with B6 or pyridoxine. And then the third scenario is when methionine is low and then high homocysteine. So now we start looking at the other side, or the left-hand side of the methylation pathway. So here on the left, so we start thinking that methyl donors here, methyl donors coming from MTHFR, so folate and B12. So it's blocked on that side or on the left-hand side. So just little clinical pearls on how to use these values and what you can do as a clinician. Where do you need to focus? You need to focus more on methyl donors versus B6 or versus the SAM-SAMe pathway. Now management, the fun stuff that we all want to know. So really, in terms of correcting the deficiencies, I always tell that to my patients and colleagues, test and don't guess. Let's get to the root cause of the issue. We have really good testing, so when available, do the standard blood testing that I presented, but absolutely add that layer of doing functional testing so you know exactly what's going on. I would say my patients are having definitely better outcomes with their supplementations since I've implemented functional testing such as the NutriVal, because I know exactly what they need and I can figure out, hey, you maybe don't need these 10 supplements. We can narrow it down to these 5 or 6 now because I know exactly what's going on. And then deficiencies can be due to inadequate intake, an increased need. Our patients are oxidized, or obese and overweight individuals, metabolic patients, they have an increased need. And then decreased absorption, the gut dysbiosis, or leaky gut patients, SIBO patients. Always think food first. And the NutriVal has a really good section in the early pages about all the food sources for the nutrients that they need. And then think about, especially when it comes to the methylation, open up the pathway later, further down. So further down, if it's blocked further down, so when the homocysteine was high, for example, open things up lower down. So open up the glutathione pathway, make sure their iron, magnesium, B6 are optimal. And then when all those things fail, well then obviously medical food meal replacements are incredibly valuable for our patients. So this is the food sources of the nutrients that I was referring to, and I encourage my patients to read those. I tell them, listen, go home, look, and there's going to be a pattern of certain key foods that you need to focus on. So tweak your diet a little bit and include some of these foods. And my patients love reading that. They go home and they actually read this section in the NutriVal, and they do change their dietary behaviors based on that, which I find pretty cool. So now supporting phase 2, remember that it starts with Keep 1, Nerve 2, then it goes to the ARE gene, and then to phase 2. So what can we do in terms of supporting phase 2? If you want to ultimately support this entire pathway, start with Keep 1 and Nerve 2. And that's our nutrients like polyphenols, antioxidants, but also sulforaphane. So the broccoli extract, sulforaphane, will actually activate things at the Keep 1 and Nerve 2 level, and then we start activating naturally the rest of the pathway. So when you're looking at supporting, and this is just a different visual of the same information I just presented, but supporting Keep 1, and Nerve 2, look at all these nutrients here on the right that we can use. I already mentioned sulforaphane, but then zinc and selenium are really critical at activating and proper functioning of KEAP1. And then NRF2, I typically recommend, if you're going to use the isoflavones or the EPA, DHA, turmeric, any of the polyphenols and sulforaphane, we're going to activate NRF2. So you don't want to start blasting them with high levels because they're going to start detoxing. And if things are not opened up lower down, or if they're slightly constipated, or they don't sweat, you're going to make your patients toxic. So I always say, especially if we're going to start activating NRF2, start with low doses. Start low, go slow, because our patients, especially if they're having weight loss at the same time, they're releasing even more toxins. So don't overwhelm their systems with toxins because they're going to feel really poorly. So the hertzing or detox reactions, it is for real, and especially some of our toxic patients in weight loss. I've seen it in my practice. So now I start a lot slower. So these are just really key nutrients. Like I start microdosing often with sulforaphane and some of the polyphenols and the antioxidants. I pulse and I microdose. I get their gut supported, and then I'll start a more specific weight loss program. So in terms of supplements, these are supplements that I use. So I put brands on there because I think we're all here to really know what to do with our patients. So in terms of direct glucose support, I've had really, really good success. My patients have had good success with these two here. There's a lot of great supplements out there, and I'm not tied to any of these brands, by the way. It's really the stuff that I've used that my patients have had good success. And then the B vitamins, think about our patients with oxidative stress who are overweight and obese or with metabolic syndrome. Most of them are going to need a good B complex, and stress B was designed specifically for people with increased stress. And then B minus by Seeking Health, that is one of my favorite ones. It's called B minus because it doesn't have the B12 and the folate in there, which frankly I think is brilliant because not all our patients tolerate the methylated Bs. We often view those as the better forms of B vitamins, the methyl B12, methyl folate, but some of our patients are very sensitive to it, especially at the beginning. If you haven't supported their methylation pathway or you haven't detoxed them, they have lots of nutrient deficiencies. A lot of patients don't tolerate the methyl Bs at the beginning. So if you blast them with a whole bunch of them, they start detoxing too quickly or you make them super anxious. So I often start with B minus, and then I start pulsing in some lower doses of B12 and folate of different forms to see what they tolerate. And I really like the B lozenges that are non-methylated. So Biotics B12, for example, it's a folate, so it's folinic. There's hydroxo B12, and then there's some B6 in there, and it's typically very well tolerated, even in the most sensitive patients who do not do well with methyl Bs. And just think that while we love the methyl Bs, patients with methylation defects or the MTHFR, you will bypass the MTHFR defect if you use folinic, not folic, folinic acid. So that's another way, and folinic acid will directly support also DNA. So in our patients who have elevated 8-OHDG, the one that's the test for the guanosine base of our DNA. So if that is in the yellow or the red, I definitely bring in some folinic acid, regardless of whether or not they need also methyl B or methyl folate. I'll do both. And then in terms of detox support, so this is like prepping the gut. I really like Permaclear by Thorne. It's a gentle probiotic, plus has anti-inflammatories and glutamine in there. So all in one capsule, you can get a gut support regimen in one capsule. And then Integrative Therapeutics has a great lipotropic complex to help detox and support nutrient needs for detox. GI Detox by Pure Encapsulation has a good herbal detox support. And then broccoli is quickly becoming one of my favorite sulforaphane extract. I'm a little biased because it's made here locally in Charlottesville, Virginia, but that's not why I use it. It is actually a really good sulforaphane extract. I've been using it on and off now for years. I was recently increasing my exercise, and I decided I'm going to try and biohack a little bit. So I increased my sulforaphane intake with this product, and I noticed improved recovery. So that was really exciting for me. So I love trying different things and biohacking myself. And I'm a nutritional IV therapist, so I always talk about IVs when I talk about management, because I'm always considering what can I do in an IM or an IV form to optimize my patient's protocol or management and to optimize my patient's health. So intramuscular or IM, of course, that's easy, B12. Most of us are familiar with that. I would not recommend what they have at the pharmacy because it's going to be the cyanocobalamin, so the B12 that has a little molecule of cyanide. So that's what the pharmacy has, and it has preservatives. Unfortunately, that's what most insurance companies will cover. But guys, you're giving toxins to your patients, so I do not recommend that. I've stopped completely recommending it unless I have a patient who's completely desperate and cannot afford anything else and Medicare will cover it. Then I will consider it. But otherwise, I get all my stuff compounded in non-preservative forms. So, but B12 shot goes a long way. Also, there's a lipotropic solution that my compounding pharmacy compounds, and it has a tiny little bit of lidocaine incorporated in there, which, because if you haven't done it yourself, you should try giving yourself an IM of a B complex. It burns. It is no joke. So please add a tiny little bit of lidocaine in there. Otherwise, it's a very uncomfortable experience, and your patients are not going to like you, or you're not going to like yourself or your nurse if you try it. So just put lidocaine in there, or get a lipotropic solution, which will have the metabolism support, so MIC complex, methionine, inositol, and carnosine or choline. Choline is a big one that you can get. So the lipotropic complex IM, that can be a big game changer for our weight patients because it gives them energy, corrects the deficiencies quickly, and they start feeling better pretty quickly. And the MIC complex in there, the metabolism support, will actually support and enhance weight loss. In terms of IVs, you can either offer it in your office or collaborate with an IV therapist. And just a 500 ml bag of saline with magnesium goes a long way. Even if your patient doesn't need a ton of other nutrients, but they tend to be a little anxious, they have mood issues, panic attacks, I often just do a saline bag with magnesium, little B6 and calcium. And I would say half of my patients who are coming in anxious will fall asleep in the IV chair by just doing that. The Myers cocktail, if you're not familiar with the Myers cocktail, it's a really good combo with magnesium, a B complex, and it doesn't have folate, so a B complex, vitamin C in there, and some, depending on which pharmacy you get it from or if you mix it yourself, some people add also calcium. And then high dose vitamin C, so you can add extra vitamin C to a Myers in a 500 ml bag, and then the patients get extra antioxidants. But then if you're addressing infections as well, you get that support that you may be supporting anti-infectious pathway with using high doses of vitamin C. ALA, for our toxic patients, start low and go slow. They will detox with that. And then unfortunately, phosphatidylcholine, as of like last week or the week before, is no longer available in IV. So I apologize for that. None of us in the US now have access to phosphatidylcholine compounded for injection anymore. Think about, you're giving them their nutrients, giving that to them pretty quickly. They may feel exhausted at first because when you start replenishing things, they get out of adrenaline. So just keep that in mind, warn your patients, okay? So we're gonna go into two cases. So this is one case, this is one of my patients. We discovered later on, she had mold illness, MCAS, which is the mast cell activation syndrome, and she had SIBO. And she was obese when she came to see me. She came to see me for a chronic fatigue scenario and for some weight loss. But upon testing, we found she had mold illness, MCAS, and SIBO, which is a common scenario in our practices. But this is her NutrEval. So we start looking at the top, look at her antioxidant needs. Almost everything she had moderate or high need for. So I knew she was inflamed and oxidized when I got that. And I got the NutrEval at the same time that I got all the other test results. So just seeing the NutriVal, I had a feeling she was going to have a toxin exposure. She was doing okay with her other nutrients, definitely needed more minerals, but the antioxidant was a big one for me. So when you start looking at that, one of my pages, that's one of my favorite pages, well, look at that. Even without seeing her GI effects, I had her breath test, I knew she had gut issues because look at all the gut markers that are off, plus some of the yeast markers. And then you look at the bottom right, her toxins, she had a little toxin accumulation. So not in the red, but she's a little bit toxic for sure in both of these, the MTBE and the styrene in the moderate or suboptimal levels in the yellow. And then look at her glutathione. This poor woman, she was so inflamed, but she was using all of it. And so for her, I definitely made an IV with the key nutrients that she needed. I gave her high doses of vitamin C. And then also I pushed glutathione on her, plus I gave her oral, I alternated between NAC and oral liposomal glutathione. I also added some binders because if you look at her mercury, so she got her mercury fillings removed as well. And then this looks at the lipid peroxides. I'm going back a little bit here, just below the glutathione. Look at her lipid peroxides. And I don't know if you remember when I mentioned earlier, the lipid peroxides are often elevated in patients with mold illness. So this was definitely one of those scenarios. And she did well, by the way. I prepped her gut, did a whole gut healing protocol, SIBO, and she did start losing weight and started feeling better. It took a good 6 to 8 months, though. It was a bit of a long route. So this is a patient, an overweight patient in her 40s who had the tick-borne infection. So I do a lot of tick-borne infections, Lyme and Bartonella. And look at this patient. I felt so bad for her. Alpha lipoic acid. She was having some liver issues and neuropathy-like symptoms. So I supplemented with oral ALA for sure, another antioxidant. Look at her B's, guys. This poor woman, we did genetic testing. She also had multiple methylation issues, which will really, it fits that her folate and B12 were in such high need, and then her magnesium. So I definitely made an IV I did a Myers on her. I would often add extra B12 and with the magnesium in there. She did really well actually with the IVs. Again, glutathione up here, suboptimal level. So she's inflamed, but we expected that based on her being overweight and chronic oxidative stress. And then you look at tin here at the bottom. I don't know if you guys are seeing that too, but I'm seeing a lot of patients with tin and cadmium in my area. So we also did a metal detox protocol. So she also did well. She took a little bit longer. As we know with tick-borne infections, they can be very complex. So, but in about 12 months, she definitely felt like a new person, and we were able to turn this around. So those are my 2 cases. So I have a couple minutes for questions.
Wow. Wonderful presentation as always. Thank you so much, Clinician Dorion. We do have quite a few clinical questions. So let's start with this one. If you could relist the name of the website you mentioned you used for nutrient depletion with medication.
Yes, it's in one of the earlier slides right after I presented the medication. So I think it's like slide 10 or something, the Methylation, which is MYTAVIN. So my vitamin, mytavin.com.
Awesome. And in your experience with supplementing with SAMe versus other nutrients for methylation defects, what has been your experience with that?
So that's a great question. It will vary quite a bit. I often do a SAMe challenge to screen to see how their methylation is working. So if patients start supplementing with just a normal dose of SAMe, I don't macro or micro dose, a regular dose of SAMe, and they feel really good, I can infer from that most likely their methylation pathway is doing okay. But if they start feeling really poorly from SAMe supplementation, it disrupts their sleep or their mood versus supporting it, for example, then I know there's some work to be done with the methylation pathway. And then I'll start looking at the methionine and homocysteine sort of ratio that I was presenting earlier. And then I start determining where in the methylation do I need to unlock things and support things. But so that's been my experience is if they feel really good and their sleep and their mood improves, awesome. Most likely their methylation is functioning fairly well, and we can pulse that. I don't keep my patients all the time on SAMe, but I'll pulse it in so they can take it for a month and then they take a break, or even less than that. But if they don't feel good on SAMe supplementation, means there's some detox and some methylation support work that needs to be done.
So with regard to glutathione, do you start with supplementing with direct glutathione? And if so, what form? Because we know that it can have variable levels of absorption. Or do you prefer to attack glutathione from the precursor cofactor aspect?
Yeah, this is definitely an area of discussion in between us clinicians doing this work. So I've had so many patients say that they didn't feel any different with supplementing directly with glutathione, and I've tried all of the forms between just the regular ones, capsules, liposomal, non-capsule liposomal, liquid form. So I would say possibly maybe about half of my patients who take directly glutathione will report some improvements with oral supplementation, but a much higher percentage of my patients report improvements after starting with NAC. So I'm a huge fan of N-acetylcysteine, of NAC supplementation. Also, if the patient has mucus, congestion issues, like so many of my mold patients, it's also a mucolytic agent, so it thins the mucus. So you can go 500-600 milligrams 2 to 3 times a day, really well tolerated, and then it's a precursor to the glutathione. So I think it's still worth trying, but if after a month they don't notice a significant improvement in more of the, you think about the oxidative symptoms or the inflammation symptoms, or if the homocysteine or inflammation markers don't improve and they don't move, so good high quality liposomal glutathione is what I recommend. If they don't feel improvements, numbers don't improve, I don't keep them on that. And then I switch to NAC. So orally, I agree, variable results. And studies are consistent with that. NAC, my patients get good results. Intravenously, I love glutathione intravenously. Almost all of my patients who get it, if I get the dose right, if I don't give them too much at first, then they do feel better. They feel less inflamed. So big fan of IV form, but orally, mixed results. I prefer NAC orally.
Okay, so in the interest of time, we're going to end our question and answer period there. For additional education materials, we'd like to encourage you to visit our website, www.gdx.net, and or you could contact client services. We also offer complimentary appointments with our medical education specialists to answer questions related to our testing, including choosing the right test and reviewing patient test results. As a reminder, you can actually access right now the handouts. It will be on your screen under handouts. You can actually download the presentation, but in about a week or so, the presentation along with the recording will be available on the website for our participants. Finally, I'd like to encourage you to register for our upcoming webinars on the website. Next month, we will have Dr. Michael Chapman presenting on the new GI effects report, advancing GI testing through microbiome analysis, and several dynamic speakers to follow. If you have not already, please definitely check out the Genova Diagnostics podcast, The Lab Report, which is focused on functional and integrative medicine, specialty laboratory diagnostics, and natural therapeutics with hosts Dr. Michael Chapman and Patty Devers, and assorted guests. I just want to thank you again, Clinician Melanie, for a great presentation. I have several notes, several tidbits that you shared with us today. It was absolutely great. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. This was super fun.
Awesome. Everybody enjoy.
Thanks. Bye.